Thank you for your help, Bob, and Larry and members of Division 10. Great to be with you. While I do the introduction to our clinic, I'm going to show you a few photographs of my layout just so you have something to look at while I talk. We moved into this house exactly 2 years ago, and I started work on the layout a couple of months later. And first, I want to say I'm happy to be with you in Kentucky, where I spent my 16th summer near Paducah and had a really great time. I can think of three reasons why you would want to super detail a car. First, you'd like to get your Golden Spike Award, and to quote the NMRA, you need to display 6 units of rolling stock, either scratch-built, craftsman, or detailed commercial kits. Well, scratch-built and commercial kits are hard, and we're going to look at an easy work on simple commercial kit. And you don't need to use all of the techniques on the car for your Golden Spike. So you don't need to use all of the techniques that we're going to talk about today. Second reason, you'd like to earn your AP certificate, Master Builder Cars, and that requires you to make 8 super detailed cars, 4 of which have to be scratch built, 4 of which have to be judged and earn more than 87.5 points. But that means that 4 of those 8 cars are not judged, they're not scratch built, and these techniques will help you in those non-judge, non-scratch built areas. The third is you're a modeler and you enjoy working with your hands and making a silk purse out of a cow's ear. And if someday you decide to scratch build a car, every one of the techniques we'll talk about today will be necessary in that build. So it's a good head start to try them out on a simple project like a basic boxcar kit, and they apply to all kinds of cars, not just boxcars. The hardest part of super detailing is getting the detail parts you want to use. On the handout, I've listed some of the sources for you. So once you've got your detailed parts together, let's get started. These are the details that we're going to be talking about today. Changing out the stirrup steps, adding new running boards, couplers of your choice, cut levers, metal wheel sets, adding a brake wheel if necessary, adding brake gear. Perhaps you want to repaint the car, in which case you'll also be adding decals, and in all cases, weathering. I'm going to start the example with a very simple Accurail undecorated boxcar. And this is what you get when you open the box. These are the pieces parts. These are the parts that we're going to use to super detail the car. On the left side, we see metal wheel sets. At 12 o'clock, we see some number 2 by 3/16 inch screws. Right in the middle is a Tichy roof walk with laterals. Below that are the corner grabs for the laterals. To the right, coupler lift bar by Detail Associates. And then going below those, we see, in this case, I'm going to be using KD whisker couplers. And down at the bottom at 6 o'clock, we see some stirrup steps. First thing I do is to pop off the running boards on the Accurail car. And let me mention, by the way, you're going to see a number of different cars. These photographs were taken on different cars over quite a number of years, but this illustrates the point that I want to get to. On Accurail, they do not glue that running board down. You can pop it off quite easily. These are the laterals for Tichy, upside down, and next to them are a couple of 40,000 square pieces of plastic, which you glue to the edge, the bottom of the lateral, and that, when you mount it on the car, will bring it up even with the center walkway. And here I've inserted the corner grabs through these metal laterals and super glued them on from the bottom. Then I'll cut those legs off, the excess legs underneath the lateral. Here I've mounted the laterals and the running board to some tape that's mounted upside down on a piece of wood that I'll use when I spray paint these. Now let me get caught up in my notes. Let's take a look at one of the easiest things we can do, and it's very effective, and that's changing out the stirrup steps. First, let me apologize because I managed to take a lot of out of focus pictures. But this is the way the stirrup step looks on the AccuRail car that we took out of the box. And you'll notice how the bottom of the ladder comes down next to the stirrup step. We want to cut all of that away, clear that casting away so there's room to mount the stirrup steps. And there I've already drilled a couple of holes in the side of the car. And these are the stirrup steps that we'll be using. These are made by Detail Associates, the number 6415. I like them a lot. They're a little hard to find, but Tichy also makes side mount stirrup steps and under mount stirrup steps. So you can use any one kind that you find. Now I'm going to jump ahead to the end of the build, and this is what they look like mounted on that car that we cleared the area for mounting them. I caution you, don't mount plastic stirrup steps like this until you've attached the trucks to the car, because sure as shooting, you're going to put that car down on the workbench and bend the heck out of those stirrup steps. So adding the stirrup steps, like adding the cut levers, are one of the last things you'll do in the build. Let's talk for a second about drilling holes. I'm sure you all know these are, and I have quite a collection of them, and they certainly do work. But when it comes to easy, I find it's a lot easier to make these holes with a battery operated drill. Black & Decker doesn't make this a nifty drill anymore, but for about $20 from a big box store, you can get a battery powered drill just fine. The key to it is this collet, which is carried by Micromark. And you know, as an NMRA member, you get a discount at Micromark. You just enter NMRA15 in the coupon code for your discount. I mark the place where I want to drill the holes with a needle in a dowel rod. And here is a mark for the hole that I've drilled. This is where we're going to mount a ring bolt, an eye bolt, which will support the coupler lift bar or cut lever. This is the cut lever installed, and as I mentioned, the cut lever and the stirrup steps really need to be installed at the last part of the build. So there is one in place. Here's another view of the cut lever from underneath the car, and you can see that it just goes through that eye bolt, and then it's glued to the coupler pocket. So obviously you've got to have the coupler installed before you finish that installation. But installing a cut lever is just as easier, if not easier, than replacing the stirrup steps. Let's talk about the trucks. Painting the trucks is pretty easy. This is what the truck looks like in the AccuRail car with the plastic wheel set in it. We're going to change to metal wheel sets, but we need to paint the truck. And I paint my trucks with the plastic wheel set in place. By doing that, I don't have to worry about getting paint into the bearing surface inside the journal box. I just paint the whole thing because I'm going to toss those plastic wheel sets anyway. We also want to paint the wheel faces of the metal wheel set. And to do that, I'm using a technique that Cody Grivno demonstrated in a video, and that's to use one of these super brushes where I don't have to mask the tread of the wheel. I don't have to mask the bearing surface of the axle. I just use that brush to paint the face and the rim on the wheel. And you can paint a wheel face in literally 4 seconds. It takes no time, and then there's no cleanup afterward. Again, it's all about being easy. Next step is possibly the most complex. I beg your pardon. This is what the truck looks like. I just pulled this off my layout, and you can see I've already got some chipping on the wheel rim that I'll have to touch up. But there again, you see the installation of the stirrup step and the coupler lift bar and the truck in place. In the AccuRail kit, you get a sprue like this. On the right-hand side, those 2 big squares are oblongs are the covers for the coupler boxes, the draft gear covers. Going to the upper left-hand corner, we see an end view of the reservoir, one of the brake components. Next to the reservoir to the right are two pins that they offer for attaching the trucks. I don't use those. I use those number 2 screws so that I can adjust how freely that truck swings. I want one of them going fairly smoothly. I want the other one to go pretty loose. In the lower left-hand corner of the sprue, we see a really bad casting of a brake wheel. Next to it is the triple valve, and next to the triple valve is the piston. These are those parts cut away from the sprue. On the bottom, excuse me, about in the center of this picture, we're seeing another casting that Accurail occasionally puts in their kits. And this has the brake rods, the brake levers, the brake lever hangers, and the piston all cast in one unit. If I were building this car for myself, I would use that. Saves a lot of time, and after all, we're trying to be easy. I would still need to drill holes to run the brake piping from the triple valve to the reservoir to the piston. And in the next slide, we show those components that we're going to use for this build. Down on the bottom, the reservoir is on the left, the piston is in the center, the triple valve is on the right. On the Accurail car in the frame above, they have half moon openings for the installation of these components. You can only get them in one way, the right way. But you have to keep in mind which way are they facing when they're mounted on the bottom of the car, so you can drill the holes in the correct sides. For example, in the reservoir in the bottom left, we want to drill holes where they will face the center line of the car. This is a diagram which you will also see on the handouts. It shows the brake rigging that we're going to be talking about today. It looks really complex, doesn't it? But we're going to simplify this and we're going to recreate it. But as we're doing this, please keep in mind, we are not building for a contest. We are building for easy super detailing. So the first thing you do is to drill the holes. Again, my apologies for the out of focus photograph. Boy, it looked good on the phone after I shot it. On the left, you can see the two holes that I drilled into the reservoir. By the way, can you see my cursor as I move on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Here in the center is the triple valve.
Oh, no.
You can't see the cursor. Okay. In the center of the screen is the triple valve, and there are three holes. One hole in the big hole right in the middle of it, that's a
Okay.
void in the casting that Accurail has. Since that void is there, I'll use that for a wire. I won't drill another hole to it. And then on the right is the piston, and the hole is drilled right in the center of the flat face on the left side as we see it in this picture. Now I've glued them in place on the car and managed to take another out of focus photograph. We're going to run wire from these components like we saw in that drawing to represent the brake piping. I'm using Tishy's phosphor bronze wire. In this case, it's 1.0125. I think that's on your handout also. So I bend the wire similar to what I saw on the drawing. I cut it to length on both ends. I dry fit it in the holes in the triple valve and in the piston. And then once I'm satisfied with the fit, I dip each end into a drop of super glue and then fit it into the components. That's one. And we do the same thing for the second one, running across the frame, excuse me, into one of the holes in the reservoir. Check the bend, cut it to length, test it, glue it in place. One more, exactly the same thing. Bend it to shape like you see in the drawing, cut it to length, test the fit, glue it in place. That's the hardest part that's done. It's all done now. It's downhill from here. Now what I've done is taken a couple of brake levers from a Tishy brake gear kit. If I didn't have the Tishy kit, and I recommend it, it's really, they make several different varieties. I have made those brake levers out of a simple piece of 20 thousandths plastic. Just cut it to length, shape it as you see, and glue it to the frame. Next step is to run the brake rods. And the brake rods couldn't be simpler. I'm using a 20 thousandths phosphor bronze wire. I lay the wire on the car where it's going to go, mark it. I use a Sharpie to mark it, cut it to length, and super glue it in position. I do that 4 times, nothing easier than that. And here we have all the brake rods and the brake piping in place. Now, each of the brake levers needs a hanger. And these I'm making out of that thin wire again. I'm simply bending it over the end of a pair of pliers, cutting to length, and drilling the holes and super gluing them in place. And finally, this is what it looks like with a shot of primer from a rattle can. And doesn't that look slick? But as you can see, same way you eat an apple, if you take this one bite at a time, it's pretty simple to do. The first time I did this, it took me 45 minutes. For this car, it took 25 minutes. It's not that difficult. I think it's one of the showiest things. I was thinking, if you show this to your spouse, she's going to look at it and say, uh-huh. But if you show it to a model railroader, they're going to say, wow, you did that? Yes, you did that. And it's easy. Sometimes you get an AccuRail car that has a fish belly center frame, right? In this case, I've drilled holes in the triple valve and in the piston, and now I'm marking the side of the fish belly frame where the wire is going to penetrate it. I'm not going to bother drilling holes in the reservoir because there's no way I can get wire through those two beams and then into tiny holes in the reservoir. But this is what it looks like when you run the wires. I didn't do a very good job of this, but um, you know, nobody's going to see it. It's going to be okay. It's good enough. Above is a frame from a similar AccuRail car with a fish belly frame. Below it is the frame from an Athearn Blue Box car. And you'll notice that Athearn has cast all of the brake detail onto the frame. I think it would be unreasonably difficult to try and drill holes and run the brake gear in this configuration. So frankly, I just don't bother. It's not easy enough for me. But there are things we can do on an Athearn car. We can still do the things that we've talked about before with the stirrup steps and the cut levers, the metal wheel sets and so forth. This happens to be a refrigerator car, and Athearn has working ice hatch covers. I think that their hinge mechanism is rather clumsy, and I'd rather not have it. So I just used an X-Acto chisel blade to carve off those hinges. You could fill those holes from underneath and sand off the filler. I don't think that's very easy. So what I did was to cover them with stripped styrene, evergreen. I don't know whether this was 1x8 or 1x10 or whatever it takes. And then after the car is painted, those begin to disappear. Now I'm going to jump in the next slide to the end of the build where I have put the ice hatches back on the car. I've added the running boards, I've added the corner grabs, and I've weathered the car. And now you can see that operation that I performed is almost invisible. We'll come back and talk about that weathering technique near the end. But going back to this Athearn car, I wanted to see if I could change the lettering of it. And I did an experiment with 91% alcohol on a Q-tip to see if it would come off, and it did. So I soaked the car for a couple hours in a bread pan in 91% alcohol, and it cleaned up very nicely. Then I cut off the stirrup steps and drilled holes for those and took another autofocus photograph for you. There's another way to mount stirrup steps, not just on the side of the car, but A-Line makes a nice line of undermount stirrup steps that are made of brass. I like these a lot. So on a different car, after I've done all the underbody work and I've snapped the frame back into the shell of the car, I drill holes in the corners and glue the A-line stirrup steps in each corner. and they come out looking like that. Now you notice in this build, I have installed the stirrup step before installing the trucks and couplers. And the reason for that is because it's easier to drill in the bottom of the car without the truck and coupler in the way. And with these brass stirrup steps, they will easily support the weight of the car. So I'm not concerned about damaging them. The Athearn car typically has a bad brake wheel, and that in the lower left is Athearn's brake wheel. Next to it is a KD brake wheel, and it's a simple matter of popping off Athearn's brake wheel and gluing the KD one back in its place. Now let's go back to that original car, and we're going to paint that car. So here we are in the paint booth. I have given the car a coat of primer from a rattle can from, like, I think I used Tamiya gray or white, and I've also painted the running boards and laterals that you see below. You'll notice that the car is suspended in a rather sophisticated holder that I found inside a roll of toilet paper. There are a couple of ways you can get at that. Um, the normal way, or if you have a puppy, that can help a lot. Now I've turned this car into a zebra. And this is a weathering technique that I picked up from our friends in the plastic modeling world. This is a technique that's called free shading. And you lay down some black or a dark color where you want what appears to be dirt accumulation, in this case, along the rivet lines. And after you paint the car, that shading shows through, but it's not as obvious as was in the previous picture. Now, I needn't tell you, you see that I'm not a very good person with an airbrush. So I developed a slightly different technique. I took a 3x5 card and I cut a strip that's about a 16th of an inch wide and the length of the height of the car. And on the back of that card, I glued a couple of pieces of 1/16th inch square strip wood so that the card would be away from the face of the car. And that produces a much finer line. And I like that detail better. But it's possible to do this without an airbrush. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you how to do that. But let's get back to the car that we just finished painting. And we're now going to give it a gloss coat in order to put on the decals. In this case, I'm using tissue decals. They're okay. They're a little thick. I'm not crazy about them. I love the K4 decals. I think they are really terrific. On each sheet, he gives you enough for 4 different cars. And if you order 2 sheets, you get a 15% discount and you also get free shipping. So applying the decals as you normally would, I use microsol, microset, and I use the Q-tip to press the decal down over the details in the car. And there's the finished car, almost finished, ready for the overcoats. And generally, I give it a couple of shots of gloss and maybe 3 coats of clear flat from a rattle can. You'll notice in this photograph, I have yet to mount the stirrup steps and the other details. That will come later, of course, as we mentioned. Now, getting back to that other way of producing those lines of dirt that gravitate to the rivet lines or the weld seams. Here I'm doing it with pan pastels and another one of those micro brushes, in this case, a really fine one, and I just apply it down the line of rivets, and the excess that you see on either side of the line of rivets, that'll just blow off the car. I'm doing it on this car, and here's the finished car, because I didn't want to strip this car and repainted it. I like the factory finish on it. So my point is, you can get this same kind of weathering without an airbrush applied to a car that's factory finished. Here's another shot of that finished car with the details added, and the rest of the weathering is done with a brush and pan pastels again. Let's go back to that Athearn car very quickly. Now it's been primed and painted. You can see where the holes are for the stirrup steps. And here is the finished car with the details added. In regard to that roof, this is a weathering technique that I like on roofs. I use oil paints. Oil paints have a very long dry time. And then I'm going to add pastel powder to the oil paint. And the way you get pastel powder is simply by taking a stick of the whatever flavor pastel you want, rubbing it on a piece of sandpaper like 100 or 150 grit. Now you've got a pile of pastel uh, dust. Then I use a brush with a fairly short bristles, fairly stiff. I dip that into the dust, and then I shake that brush over the oil paint while it's still wet. As I shake it off the brush like you would flick the ash off the end of a cigarette. Then I clean the brush on a piece of paper towel, so there's not a lot of powder left on it. And I use that to ponce the dust into the paint by sort of dropping the brush out of my fingers, through my fingers, onto the top of the car. That sets the rust dust into the paint and it gives you that rusty texture that you see. On the sides of the car, I like to use Bragdon powders. I like Bragdon powders a lot because they have a self-adhesive. And as you rub it on the car, the friction causes the adhesive to activate and it sticks on the car without the need for any overspray. So let us review what we've talked about and what we've done to replace stirrup steps, running boards, couplers of your choice, cut levers, the changing out to metal wheel sets, adding a brake wheel where appropriate, bending our own wire for the brake gear, painting where we felt like it, adding decals if we painted the car, and then in all cases, weathering. And it's not that hard. I want to show you some examples of other things that I've done and what you can do. If you've mastered these techniques, you can start attacking all kinds of cars and doing things to them. Here is one where I've applied most of that techniques, but I made my own decals here on an inkjet printer. Likewise, these decals were made on an inkjet printer. This car I was thinking about for the Belden Brick Company. If they had their own boxcar, what would it be? And well, I thought they'd make it out of brick. So I finished this car. In this case, I added grab irons and ladders and the other techniques we talked about. I attacked this car, which was, I think, Varney or it's really old. Look at the size of those rivets. I love the artwork on the side, but they were nowhere near finished with it as it would have looked prototypically. So I attacked the end and I built the gantry and the framework at the end to be a little bit more typical. For one of our monthly contests at the division, we were each given as many shells of 50-foot boxcars as we wanted, and we were asked to make anything we wanted out of them, like a yard master's office or a station or an apartment, anything we wanted. And I decided that I would make the 50-foot car into a 40-foot car. And so I cut that down and I added all the techniques we talked about today to end up with that car. On my old layout, I used to run short passenger trains, and I couldn't run 80-foot cars. I cut down cars to 50-foot. And again, using the techniques we talked about today of adding details to them. I had some leftover material when I did the same thing with some Athearn heavyweights, and I ended up making a sleeper. I took a 3-dome tank car and cut that down for a thumbs project. And I followed an article in a Railroad Model Craftsman to take a Bachmann bobber caboose and add details to that. Again, it's basically the same techniques that we've been talking about today. So gentlemen, it's not that hard. I appreciate your attention today, and I'll close this down. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.